It's been a while, but we are back and we are rolling on with episode 11 of season 2 of Transformers Generation 1 called Microbots. Let's get after it, fam. This is Energon Entries. Welcome back to Energon Entries, everybody. As always, this is your host, Matt Freites. It has been a month or over a month since we've come out with an episode, and I do apologize for that. If you did not hear my announcement earlier in the week, I went on vacation. I had content planned. I had all intentions to record it. It just didn't happen. I got caught up on vacation, working with my kid, everything. But you know what? This is a podcast that I do on the side. It's something that I do for fun. I don't do it for a living. And so I'm just happy to be back, and I want to say thank you if you stuck with me through that entire time. And we're going to continue doing what we have been doing. And so let's get into the episode recap. The episode begins with archaeologists in South America discovering an ancient spacecraft, which Soundwave and Megatron recognize as their old Decepticon ship. Megatron sets out to retrieve the ship's energy core, called the Heart of Cybertron. At the Autobot headquarters, Preceptor uses a shrinking enlarging device to repair Ironhide's memory chip, while Braun insults him for not being a soldier. Optimus Prime orders Braun, Bumblebee, and Ratchet to follow him to South America to stop Megatron. Megatron and his troops blast through a rainforest, amusingly encountering various wildlife, and reach the ship first, retrieving the Heart of Cybertron. Hook implants it into Megatron, vastly increasing his power, leading to a battle where the Autobots are defeated and only escape thanks to Smokescreen. Back at the base, Wheeljack creates a force field while Preceptor, Braun, and Bumblebee shrink to infiltrate Megatron's body and disconnect the Heart of Cybertron. The Decepticons get overcharged on Energon and Megatron passes out, allowing Powerglide to deliver the tiny Autobots into his body. Preceptor, Braun, and Bumblebee navigate through Megatron's body to his brain, where they disconnect the Heart of Cybertron. Megatron attacks Autobot headquarters but is deprived of his weapon when the tiny Autobots remove the heart. The episode ends with Braun tossing the unstable Heart of Cybertron into the sky, where Preceptor detonates it, earning Braun's newfound respect for Preceptor. Alright, so this episode had a lot going for it, and definitely starting out the episode as we see humans, which we see a lot of times now because humans are a lot more interwoven into these stories. But we see an American woman with blue hair. And back in the 80s, I can tell you that somebody looking like this had a certain connotation. I'm not going to say what it is because it's stereotypical. It doesn't make a lot of sense. But back in the day, I'm sure when a bunch of men were watching this, they thought that this woman with blue hair was a certain way. But it's much less common back then, whereas today, just about anybody can show themselves in any way that they want. And it's mostly really seen as something that is just normal. Now, the archaeologists discover what appears to be a spacecraft, and they somehow uncovered this giant portion of it. And I wonder how long it took them to do that, because when you see archaeological digs, usually they're using brushes and they're brushing away very, very slowly because they're trying to find very, very fragile fossils. In this case, they just happen to find what looks like a quarter of the back end of this giant spaceship. However, when we go to Autobot headquarters, we get brand new Autobots immediately when we see the base. That's pretty cool because we haven't seen a lot of them up until this point. If you remember, we had an episode where we saw a ton of them, and then they've sort of kind of really been slowly introduced up until this point. So we see Preceptor, who is a microscope. Now, it's interesting because he is a microscope, and he's seen as nerdy, and he's seen as basically not fit for duty because he's not a soldier. And I immediately love that Braun is out there with what is today considered toxic masculinity. And he's basically saying that Preceptor is not pulling his weight because he doesn't fight. This is the age-old brains versus brawn story. And even back then, nerds were always made fun of. Now, I kind of related to this a little bit because I was on the more geeky side when I was younger. And so I got picked on a lot for being smart. So Preceptor is sort of living the dream here. Preceptor had a Decepticon logo on his chest at one point, and this is when Prime was asking him to go to battle. So as they're kind of getting all this information, we see this weird quirk. We've seen this before too, where we've seen like Megatron have a red Decepticon symbol and things like that. Just weird how this stuff happens. And I really wish somebody could come on this podcast and let me know how that happens. All right, so the Decepticons go to the rainforest and they're clearing this rainforest in South America. And it kind of makes me wonder if this was some kind of a political statement, because I know when I was growing up, the deforestation of the rainforest was something that I heard about all the time. And so maybe the bad guys clearing the rainforest, this was some very, very slight political agenda that was put in here by one of the animators or whatever. Again, deforestation has been a thing for decades. And of course, the Autobots are going to go down there to meet them, but they drive to South America. Again, we think, they have never really confirmed this, but it seems pretty logical that the Autobots base is in the United States. That's a really, really long drive. However, as all of this is happening, the Autobots are driving down to South America. Megatron and crew are clearing this rainforest. I do love that Megatron explains why they're blasting through the forest, because they need to remain out of satellite contact. Very rarely do we get continuity in this show, but this one makes almost no sense, because you'd think at some point the Decepticons and the Autobots and everything are so large, they're alien life forms, that they would pretty much have something, and I'm talking about the humans, would have some type of surveillance on them all the time. However, it doesn't make a lot of sense that they're going through the rainforest when they could just fly somewhere. So at least Megatron is trying to give us some type of an explanation as to why they're doing something so primitive. And there has to be, during all of this, some kind of a meaning of a snake attacking Starscream, because when you really think about it, Starscream is a snake in and of itself after all. And that's really what he does every single episode. So I wonder if this is maybe a little bit of foreshadowing. So they get to this ship and they find what they're looking for, which is the Heart of Cybertron. And being in this 4 billion-year-old ship kind of makes you wonder how Cybertron has survived this whole time, because something called the Heart of Cybertron seems pretty important to it. So without it, maybe this is why Cybertron has just continued to lose resources over all of these billions of years. And in this actual scene here, we get another animation quirk where Hook's head comes in. It's completely silver. Hook is kind of almost the Preceptor of this bunch, so it almost seems like, and it just dawned on me right now, that Preceptor and Hook in different ways are sort of playing the same role for the Autobots and the Decepticons, respectively. When Megatron finds the Heart of Cybertron, he kind of goes full Emperor Palpatine and he starts shooting lightning out of his fingertips, which is pretty interesting. It's powerful energy as well, because he's able to take out the Autobots in one shot. And that's very similar to the Force Lightning, so this kind of all tracks. Again, Star Wars has been out for a while. I think this was after Return of the Jedi, so this all makes a lot of sense in terms of inspiration. And during this battle, though, we see a lot of other new Autobots showing up that maybe we haven't seen in a while, but we do see some new ones. Blue Streak we've seen before very infrequently, but we see Hoist, we see Grapple, we have Preceptor there. Hoist and Grapple were not in any of the previous episodes, so this is completely new. And again, I'm watching this knowing who they are, but if you're watching this as brand new, you wouldn't know who these people are by name. So it's just interesting how all of this has sort of been introduced up until this point. Now, Braun's attitude toward Preceptor is very similar to me. You remember the episode we talked about where Cliffjumper was convinced Mirage was a traitor? They went to the well on this so many different times, and I like that Optimus Prime was standing up for his own by showing true leadership and saying that basically, Braun, if you don't stop doing this, you're going to have to answer to me. And if he didn't do that, what would that say to Preceptor? Would that say that he is valued by the team? And would that feel like leadership to anybody? And I think that Optimus Prime is a true leader, and this is one of the things that makes him different, especially different from Megatron. Now, the Decepticons are using Energon cubes as if they're alcoholic beverages, and I thought that was pretty great, because we know that Energon is the lifeblood of the Transformers, and it's the only thing that the Decepticons are worried about is getting energy. And so when they have it in spades, they drink it as if it's whiskey or scotch or something like that. And it basically gets them drunk. I love that. This is what the Transformer equivalent is of drunk, and they're over-energized. That's what Power Glide called it. But really, it's Transformers drunk, and I thought that was great. And in real life, when we get drunk, a lot of times there are consequences. And we find out that Megatron is the kind of drunk that thinks he can do anything. And he's also kind of the sentimental guy, because when he gets drunk, he starts talking about and being nostalgic about the days of Cybertron past. And, we don't really get a whole lot of that from Megatron, but maybe, just maybe, under all that evil, there was a really good person under there, or a really good robot under there. Maybe we'll see that in a future episode. I doubt it, but it was something interesting, because let me tell you, a drunk person's words are a sober person's thoughts, and Megatron is not immune to that whatsoever. So after all that, while Preceptor, Braun, and Bumblebee are in there trying to disconnect the Heart of Cybertron, Megatron flew like 100 miles to get to the Ark. And according to Optimus Prime, it took him about 10 minutes. So by calculations, very roughly, he went 10 miles a minute, which is pretty incredible. And this again begs the question, why aren't the Autobots flying or capable of flying? Because it would seem very, very helpful in times like these. Now, Megatron's evil brain impulses, as they're in there, they're trying to disconnect it. All of those manifesting as little snake-like creatures, I thought that was a nice touch, because they're evil thoughts. He is an evil robot, an evil leader, so he should have negative thoughts, and I thought that they depicted them maybe a little too on the nose, but at least it was good that they went the extra mile there. And Braun, let me tell you, so they finally get through all of this. He has quite an arm. He throws the Heart of Cybertron. It was like 2,000 miles into the air. I know he's supposed to be the strongest of the Autobots. He's very, very tiny, but these little discrepancies that come up with how far things go or how big things are, it just all fits the show. I mean, it's an 80s cartoon, so of course you're going to get that. And as always, all through this, the Autobots brotherhood shines through, which I love. That's kind of been a theme as I've seen every single episode, is that no matter what kind of strife the Autobots are in, they always come together and they always find themselves fighting for themselves and the team. And I think that that's a great thing, and it's great to see that every single episode. How did I feel about this overall? Well, this may be the first episode where a new Autobot is the focal point, as Preceptor was here. And I love that. Preceptor takes the lead in the character development department here. And that's something that we need to see as we go along, because it's fine first season to just have sort of bad guys do things, good guys win in the end. But when we're elongating this now to the point that it's going to surpass in episodes season 1, we need, with all these characters, some kind of development. I thought it was pretty neat. Again, very surface level, but it's something. And while Preceptor was the main focus, again, we finally saw some of the other new Autobots in the fray, actually. Smokescreen having the most impact, saving the Autobots when Megatron was going full Emperor Palpatine. Power Glide was in it. We saw Warpath, the tank. Smokescreen, obviously, Hoist, Grapple, who had never been seen on screen, either one of them. I love that. I love that we're going to start seeing a lot more of them. And obviously, at this point, the toys are probably out, but seeing new faces, hearing new voices, getting new stories, maybe even some character background on them, I think that that's good, and it gives a little bit of depth to a cartoon that really isn't seeking depth, but it's always a good thing. Megatron and the Decepticons, again, they show human tendencies. They got drunk. I think that's good, because they're not just these perfect, I don't want to call them killing machines, but these perfect machines of destruction. They actually have feelings too. And by getting drunk, we saw a little bit of that, especially with Megatron. And obviously, overall, this may be a super, super dusty reference, but this episode concept was certainly taken from Fantastic Voyage, which was a 70s movie where a ship was shrunken down so that it could go inside the body of a human being and save this human being or whatever it was. Obviously, that was the inspiration here, and it was overt probably at the time, but now 40 years later or 50 years later after that movie came out, it's probably a completely dusty reference. But if you're old enough and you're like me and you remember it, then maybe that's something that means something to you. So we get to the end of this episode. We're going to get to episode 12 next time. Like I said in my announcement earlier this week, I have a bunch of episodes written up already that I've watched. But if you have watched this or you watch it and then listen to this, I would love to know what you think. Email me, mattyicemedia@gmail.com is the email address to do that. You can find that in the show notes, of course. I'd love to hear from you, know how long you've been watching. I'd love to hear from you, know how long you've been listening. If you have any questions, comments, whatever it is, I'd love to hear from fellow Transformers fans. I'll be back next week with fresh content. I hope this finds everybody well. I hope this finds everybody safe. And I will talk to you next time. This is Energon Entries. The opinions and viewpoints expressed on Energon Entries are those of Matt Freites and his guests and not necessarily those of the Matty Ice Media Network. Energon Entries is exclusively owned by Matt Freites and is brought to you by the Matty Ice Media Network.